So thank you for coming. I appreciated the opportunity to be able to talk about this. It's something that it was an incredible experience for me, and it's something that I really do enjoy sharing. So, this is a long story. There's lots of different pieces to it. There's lots of things that people generally want to know, the what-if questions or what was that like. I'm just telling one piece about some lessons and some parts of it that might apply to us. For me, this is the biggest lesson I learned early in the campaign, was the campaign staff profile. I was a relatively inexperienced political person that showed up in Milwaukee, and I was expecting rooms full of smart people. It's the Obama campaign. It's the best political machine that had ever been built. It was rolling over Hillary Clinton. Like this, it didn't make sense. So it's obviously, it's the best, for me, my perception, it was the best political machine that's ever been built. There's going to be just like smart people wandering around. Like, we're going to have, like, I'll be doing something and some smart person's going to come up and be like, oh, if you use this pen, you're going to be like 10 times faster. I'm like, all right. Like, I was expecting that. I was expecting really smart people telling me what to do. So I showed up, and I was the oldest person on almost every team I worked on. It baffled me. And the people making decisions, the Jason Greens and the Kevin Paleos, what's the name of the documentary you saw? Oh, We the People. We the People, or By the People. It's the official documentary of the Obama campaign. The documentary crew followed him for about 18 months. The people that you see in it, they look a little bit older because the campaign aged people, but they're mid-30s. These are... What these people had was not experience. They were not the smartest people in the room. These were 20 to 24-year-olds, maybe just finished university, maybe still had a semester left, that were doing this. It wasn't on experience. It wasn't on training. It was just confidence in, okay, Barack and David Plouffe said this, so we're going to do this. And, well, we'll talk. Well, it largely built on Iowa. People forget, I think, in this story, that Barack was getting hammered in Iowa. Like, he was single digits polling. Like, he was not always... He was Barack Obama, the guy that gave a great speech in 2004, but he was up against the nominee, Hillary Clinton. Like, Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee. So it was, Barack's fun, but there's our nominee, Hillary Clinton. So David Plouffe and Barack said, if we run a campaign this way, we'll get there. And it wasn't a bunch of experts that did it. It was kids. That came through, that just had energy, time, and enthusiasm, that did just a relentless, dedicated, committed amount of door knocking and outreach in Iowa that pulled him into the lead there. So the most common question I get asked is, no, really, Rob, tell me what it was like. Like, what? And so it's, what was a day like as a field organizer in the Obama campaign? So you wake up 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and you head in for your first of 4 meetings that day. So the first meeting that day was your team staff meeting. Depending on what office it was the face-to-face. As a field organizer, you meet with however many other field organizers are there and your regional field director to talk about what's happening that day. From then, you may spend half an hour answering emails if there's a bunch you have to answer, which should take you to somewhere between 9:30 and 10, and you start making phone calls. At about 5 o'clock, you stop making phone calls. If there's an event that day or a rally during the day, you might have to go help out at that event, although that was fairly rare as well. Typically, you had to recruit volunteers to help at the events. The phone calls that you're making, depending on where you are, if you're, what state you were in or what the environment is like, typically they were persuasion calls, so it was calling people that we didn't know how they felt, to just take a little bit longer on the phone to persuade them to vote for Barack. If it was a little bit closer to the election and we felt like we were doing okay, we might just move into supporter ID calls, which are the quick, who are you voting for? Who are you voting for? Who are you voting for? Phone call. You might take one of those hours, 1.5, to do volunteer recruitment calls, where you'd call through ID support, people that had been ID'd as supporters or had been tagged in our databases through donors or previous involvement to be volunteers. By 5 o'clock, you'd switch to doors. This is on a typical weekday. And so you'd knock doors till dark or past dark, depending if your regional field director would let you. And then you'd go back to making calls until about 9. And that was it. That was as glamorous as it was. You made phone calls and you knocked on doors. Repeat. If you got tired of calls, you knocked on doors. When your feet were sore, you made calls. Not much variety in that. The other thing that would happen in the evenings is, particularly when we were setting up in a new place, you would run a volunteer meeting. So you would just call through all your ID'd supporters. You'd send an email to anybody that had been on myBarackObama.com in your area and just say, hey, there's going to be a volunteer meeting at the Panera Bread on Tuesday at 7. And you do something very similar to what we've done here so far. You'd share your story, you'd get them to share theirs, and then you'd say, okay, what this campaign does is we make phone calls and we knock on doors. That's what this is. It's not even, when Ben was talking to us about the 4 or 5 things, we did 2. There's no signs, we knocked on doors and we made phone calls. We'll talk about that a little bit in a second as well. And then in the evening, you'd usually have 2 or 3 more meetings. You'd have a conference call in your region. You'd have a conference call for your state. And in those conference calls, all you were doing typically was reporting numbers. How many phone calls did you make that day, or did your area make that day? How many doors did you knock? How many supporters did you ID?
Is you want to identify who your supporters are and then bring them out to the polls on election day. I mean, that's in terms of what you're actually doing when the writ is dropped. You're identifying supporters and bringing them to vote. That's what a campaign is. So what you want to think about are the activities that you're doing those 2 things. If they're doing one of those 2 things, fantastic. Then you're running an activity that is getting at the core of what you want to do. And the 2 best examples that I've seen used for that are knocking on doors and making phone calls, because you're going out to talking to people, you're finding out what they believe in, and if they're going to vote for your guy or girl on election day.
And so the point is, what separated the people that were great and were happy being field organizers from the people that were miserable and hated it is how simple were you able to keep the job? Were you able to keep it down to persuading voters or IDing them? If you were able to keep it that simple, then you tended to be pretty good at your job. If you were distracted or allowed other asks to sort of take away from that, so if it was, oh, I need to run and go get something for the office, or this one volunteer really needs to meet with me for an hour and a half about whatever, you tended to feel like you were being pulled in too many directions. The people that were able to stay really focused on what is it that we want to do? What is it that's going to make the difference between winning and losing my region, this town, this state? That was what made a great field organizer. It is a grind. Your first week might be fun. Hey, I'm the candidate. I'm running a campaign. We're knocking on doors. We're making phone calls. We're putting stickers on mailboxes. Woo! And by the second week, your feet hurt, and you don't want to spend 10 hours knocking on doors, and you don't want to make the phone calls, and 9 out of 10 people that said they were going to volunteer for you didn't show up, and the ones that did show up, they want to help. They just don't want to make calls or knock on doors. No, I want to help. No, okay. And it's hard. And this isn't easy. What we're trying to do is really, really hard. And it's a grind. You grind it out. And so what you do is you take pride in that. What we can do as the GPO, and I'll talk about this a little later, we can work harder at this than the other parties. That is our only advantage. They're better. They're better funded. They're better at staying consistent with messaging. They've been networking for generations of people. They can do those things. We're not there yet. So what we can do is outwork them. That's really, if you want to boil down what the Green Party needs to do, that's it. We can outwork them or we can't. Those are our choices. So if we're going to do that, be proud about it. Like, we can take pride in grinding it out over the other parties. Like, we can take Frank Valeriot, part of an incredibly popular liberal family, who's going to get, like, if there was no campaign run, 40-some-odd% in Guelph, and we can, in advance, take pride in the fact that we can outwork him and his team that's been there for generations in this family and bring him down to 30% so that Bob Bell has a shot. Shane Jolly can take pride in the fact that for 3 campaigns in a row he's been grinding it out, and this next time he's going to win. That's what we can do.